So we're going to talk about chapter 21, which is qualitative data collection. Quite a bit of the work that I do for my own research line is qualitative in nature or mixed methods. So I'm going to throw some personal examples in as we go, but let's take a look. So our objectives, we're going to talk about where we get our qualitative data sources, the different techniques that we use when we're looking at qualitative data collection. We're going to describe the strategies that help us ensure that the data that we're getting is accurate, or in this case, it's called trustworthy and reliable, meaning that two different people would see or record the same kinds of things. And then we're going to describe the initial steps for conducting qualitative research. So let's jump in. A couple definitions here to start. First one is field work. And these are all of the things that are gathered through the immersion or being in the setting alongside of whatever's happening. So that's called field work. And a lot of times what you're recording is called field notes. So it kind of makes sense that way, field work and field notes. The whole idea behind doing qualitative research is sort of like a fly on the wall approach where you're gathering narrative data, somebody said something about this or what you see or hear, and so it's visual audio data. But the idea is to be as unobtrusive as possible. Like people don't even know you're there. That what you're doing isn't affecting how people respond, other participants respond or act, that it is authentic. And so we can do this by observation, participant observation, where the researcher participates in the situation being observed. So if I'm gathering data, let's say it's on an exercise class, and I decide I'm going to go to a Tabata class. I'm going to go to the class, I'm going to observe what's going on around me, but I'm still a participant in the class. Non-participant observation, which is most of what I do, I go out and I observe teachers. And when you all are in your internships, you'll have somebody who comes and gives you feedback after they watch you teach a lesson. That's a non-participant observation. So the researcher is recording what they're observing, but they're not interacting with the other participants. In this case, like with your student teaching, that would be the students who you are teaching. They're basically looking at things from a distance. So those field notes are the observations that are then recorded. There's no evaluation as to the quality, meaning like the teacher's doing this right, the teacher's doing this wrong. What I'm observing is right or wrong. I'm literally just writing down everything that I see. No assumptions, preconceptions. They're written as soon as possible, usually during the time that the observation is happening or as soon after as possible. That way we don't have to worry about recall issues in our memory. And then we need to make sure that we add a time and date stamp so that we can track when the actual observation happened. So here's a sample. This was some field notes that I took from a research study that I've been as a longitudinal research study, meaning I've done it over several years. And you can see here, it's just observations about what was happening. So it was a kindergarten class. You can see that. There's a descriptions of sort of the who, what, where, how, why, everything you can think of that you think would be important, you write it down. So just to give you some examples. So different sources and techniques that can be used. We have interviews. I use these a lot. I use what's called a structured interview guide, meaning the same questions over and over. But it could also be an interview where the researcher asks questions and then asks the next question based on the response of the previous question. The structured approach allows you to compare one participant to another, so it's helpful when you're looking at differences between the people who you're interviewing or similarities. That way you can say, okay, this person answered the question like this person answered the question like that. There's similarities here, or there's differences. The biggest thing is not interrupting or asking questions to get to a specific answer. That would be like a leading question. You have to be very objective. Follow-up questions to get more detail if they don't share. I sometimes when I do these, people will say a lot, and then I have some people who just barely say anything. Remaining objective, non-judgmental, writing those notes as soon and doing the transcriptions as soon as possible afterwards. I try to use audio recordings because it's just easier to do the transcription from there. And then the transcripts are verbatim. So the amount of ums and uhs, they also get into the record. If you email the interview question, sometimes that's easier because it saves you from having to do the transcription and you can just cut and paste things into a larger document. So here's a sample. You can see some of the questions that I would have asked, but like this is something that I would do, and every participant would get asked exactly the same questions. So that allows me to compare participants across the same questions. So some sources and other techniques, focus groups, putting a couple people together, asking questions to the group, allowing participants to respond. You may or may not get an answer from every participant, but sometimes people feel a little bit more likely to share things if they're in a group. Again, same kind of ground rules apply with transcribing verbatim. Questionnaires and surveys, those are super helpful if you want to be able to gather a large amount of data. You need to make sure that the questions are actually reflective of what you want. And a lot of times adding an other section where people can write some open-ended comments can be super helpful. It does allow you to track like who's responded and who hasn't, but it is something that needs to be put into the IRB approval process if that's going to be used. There's other things that can also be used in terms of sources of data, journals, maps, video, audio. I might use a lesson plan and put that into like an archival document. Anything that I think is going to be important. Sometimes I take pictures of like how the gym space is set up, or like a bulletin board, or if there's a handout that's going home, I might add that in. Things that are really important. Validity, we talked about this in module 1, but measuring what was intended to be measured. This research has to be credible, transferable, dependable, and confirmable. Those are the 4 sort of tests for making sure that the data is what we're measuring is valid. So some strategy that we use, peer debriefing, that means that I'm talking to somebody else about what I'm seeing to see if they're seeing the same kinds of things or if what I'm seeing makes sense or if there's other questions that need to be answered. Talking to somebody who knows a little something. Triangulation means that I'm using more than one data source to sort of prove my point. So I might have journal responses and then I have my observations along with maybe, let's say, an assessment score that the student took. And if they're all showing like progress or improvement, then I can definitely point to there's an increase in whatever the aspect is. Member checks means that I am checking back with the person who I interviewed or surveyed to make sure that how I am displaying the data or my understanding of the data is accurate. So longer research studies tend to have more validity because there's more of a chance that you're seeing everything that could happen. And if things happen over and over and over again, you can be pretty sure that that is the quote unquote normal. Reliability means that if I go collect the data and you go collect the data, we're going to see a lot of the same things, that there's going to be good continuity between what we're observing and recording. And so having an audit trail means that we have a very structured step. Like step 1 is this, step 2 is this, step 3 is this. We document the way that we go about doing things so that it's easy for me to sort of follow the recipe and you to follow the same recipe and whoever to follow the same recipe. We tend to get more reliability in our results. The trustworthiness is our believability. Are we giving an accurate picture of what's actually happening? Am I being objective in how I'm recording things? And it's the same kind of strategies that are used there with audit trail, triangulation, and things like that. So we want this qualitative research to be more relevant than necessarily like generalizable, meaning that it applies to all circumstances. So a lot of times I will say that, this data is only indicative of the experience of these 5 teachers. It's not necessarily generalizable to all physical education settings. It's just a comment that I would make. So getting started, make sure you introduce yourself to the participants, start slow, short amount of times of interactions. That's to give comfortability. And then we want to be a little bit more passive until those participants are comfortable with us being in the space. And then make sure that you don't take the results personally. If somebody says something, you're just basically recording it. You have to have thick skin sometimes. So in summary, the work is really time consuming and sometimes it's really tedious, but it gives you a really good picture with a lot of depth and breadth about whatever it is that you're studying.